Hello and welcome. In this video, we are going to talk about functional requirements, and then we'll talk about the functional requirements for the application we are going to build as well. Now, this concept of functional requirement is something that I believe every developer does before starting an application or before building an application. Before you start working on a project or building an application, as a developer, you usually sit down to think, okay, what are the features that this application will have? Now, these features are usually grouped or categorized into the functional and the non-functional. Okay, here we are going to talk about the functional requirements. Now, the functional requirement involves requirements or features that are expected of the application or what the user expects to see in an application. Okay, that is the idea of what functional requirement does. So the definition of functional requirements are specific features, behaviors, and capabilities that a system must possess. Okay, so you are building, for example, you are building a to-do application. You have to think about the functional requirements, and the functional requirements are users should be able to add to-dos, users should be able to delete to-dos, users should be able to edit to-dos. Those are functional requirements. So the features that your application will have, you group them as functional requirements. And those requirements or features are ones that usually impact or are actions that the users usually perform when they access your system or access your application. Okay, so they are requirements that are specific features, behaviors, and capabilities that a system must possess. Now, these requirements describe what the system should do. Okay, so example with the to-do application, users should be able to create to-dos, users should be able to delete, users should be able to update to-dos. So those are functional requirements. Now, if you bring that down to a more complex application like your e-commerce application, what are the functional requirements of an e-commerce application? Some of the requirements are user authentication. So users need to be authenticated. They should be able to create accounts. Users should be able to list products. Users should be able to search for products. Users should be able to add product to cart. You see, so those are functional requirements. Those are requirements that involve actions from the users. Okay, so those are grouped as functional requirements. Now, they are typically defined in detail to guide the design, development, and testing processes. So like I said, as a developer, probably you might not have been aware, but every application you have built, you have at one point or another defined your functional requirements. It might be you didn't write them down, but you had them at the top of your head. Okay, so this application I'm building, these are the features that the application will have. So those are what functional requirements are. Now, let us define the functional requirements for our freelance marketplace. So for the freelance marketplace that we want to build, what are the functional requirements? Okay, user authentication. One functional requirement is user authentication. So users should be able to create accounts. They should be able to log in. Users should be able to reset their passwords. Okay, so this is one functional requirement for our own freelance marketplace. So user authentication. That is why we are going to have our auth service as a separate feature. Okay, or a separate service. So user authentication is one. User profiles is another functional requirement. So a user should be able to create a seller's profile. Okay, like I said, when a user creates an account, automatically they are tagged as a buyer. Then they can create a seller's profile to become a seller. And then they can also update their profiles. Okay, so this is another functional requirement. Search and filters is another functional requirement. So buyers should be able to search for gigs. Okay, they should be able to also search by name for sellers or by username. Okay, now like I said earlier, we are not going to implement every feature that is expected of a freelance marketplace. One such feature we're not going to implement is allowing the buyers to post a job or post a gig. Okay, only sellers will be able to create gigs, and then buyers will search for those gigs or search by name, and then it will display all the gigs of a particular users that they are searching for. Maybe later you can expand to allow buyers, okay, buyers can post jobs. Okay, I want this done, and then users can bid for that job. Okay, that is a feature you can implement. But search and filters is definitely a functional requirement. Then the messaging system is also a functional requirement. Buyers and sellers can communicate. Then ratings and reviews is also a functional requirement. Buyers can review sellers after they complete a job, and then sellers can review buyers after they complete a job as well. If the buyer is a good buyer, the seller can review. If the seller is good, the buyer can review as well. Then payment gateway. So sellers should be able to have option of using different payments if they want to make a purchase. Now, for our own use case, we're only going to be using one payment option, which is Stripe. Later, you can integrate your own. Maybe you can integrate other payments options or payment gateways. And then view orders. Buyers and sellers should be able to view active gigs. So if a buyer has a gig that is active, completed or cancelled, or they should be able to see those orders. And then lastly, sellers should be able to cancel orders. Now, the way we are going to implement it, only sellers will be able to cancel. Buyers will not be able to cancel orders, only sellers. Okay, so if a buyer needs, maybe for some reason, an order to be cancelled, they just have to message the seller, and then the order will be cancelled. So these are some of the functional requirements that we are going to have in our application. There's going to be some smaller features or requirements, but these are the main ones we are going to have.